This is my go-to brush. Started using it a couple years ago. I haven't looked back. The Winsor Newtons are really good as well. The funny thing is, this last year I found out that these crappy nylon brushes put on a lot of paint with one hit. And for base coating, they are fantastic. So if you want to motor through your base coats, if like on this particular model, I obviously airbrushed all the purple, but I did not airbrush the gold. So the gold you have to paint on. Well, that can take a while. Obviously, I didn't go with this little brush, but a larger one. But for some reason, the nylon brushes lay down more pigment than a really good like Klinsky Sable brush. So this brush will take me 3 or 4 coats to get a good base coat on. This coat, this will take me 1 and maybe a couple little touch-ups. And so that was the one little thing I found this year where I kind of regressed in my brush selection, and I really like it because it works. I'm too impatient to be waiting around for stuff to build up with color and everything. All that stuff is done at the end when I'm detailing. Then I'm fine with patience because I see where the project's going, but at the base coating stage, I need to get paint on the bottom, or it starts bogging down. What I'm going to show you today is, I'm sure not, well, a lot of people use airbrushes. And if you already use an airbrush, then great, because you kind of know what I'm talking about. As far as the airbrushing goes, if you don't, maybe I'll come back one day and do an airbrushing class and show you how I do that and my thought process behind it. But for now, I'm going to show you how to actually paint on top of your airbrushing. And that's where a lot of people get like freaked out, and that's where a job will get bogged down. You need to be able to take your perfect blend. If you notice, like on this guy, I've got little highlights on top, generalized highlights on top of the musculature and everything. You need to be able to bring that up even higher. When I airbrush, I'll always just do a general airbrushing, and I'll only go to a certain point where it's not as high as I want the highlight to go, but and it's not as dark as I want the shadow to go, because I want to be able to paint that in later. But you got to be confident enough to be able to paint a perfect blend on top of a perfect blend. So what I do, let's see here. This is my wet palette. The way I use my wet palette is the right way. That's the only thing I'll say is that I do the right way that no one else does. But all these techniques, you can do whatever you want. I put water in till it fills up just right, even with the sponge, and that gives me a long working time. I only use my wet palette for the paint session that I'm using it in. And I let the sponge dry out afterwards, so I don't have a problem with like mold in my sponge, which is super disgusting. It only happened once, and it's never happened again. I put my brush on my mouth so much, you really don't want mold in your.
Is that sponge something you get at an art store?
Yeah, you can get this at Michael's. This is a Masterson wet palette. They carry them at Michael's. They carry them at.
They call it a wet palette?
Yeah, yeah. They have a really big one, which is ridiculous, because where are you going to put your model?
Yeah.
I mean, we deal with miniatures, like, it's... so I get the small one. It comes with paper, wet palette paper, with this long laundry list of instructions on how to use. My instruction for that is, you take the paper out of the box and then throw it in the trash can. And then you buy yourself some butcher paper. Just regular baking paper you get at Vons. It'll last you a long time. I don't cut them out the same size as the palette, because I actually use the palette for adding water, and I actually use it for cleaning my brush. So I don't have the little bottle of water or anything. Once you put it in the water, it will want to curl up because it's been curled. So I just put paint pots around the outside edge. When I first started, I would flip it over, because then it's flat immediately, but it's all wet on top. And what I want, the baking paper doesn't allow any water to come through, and that's why I throw away the palette paper that comes in the wet palette, because it allows water to come through. And I want to have. The water I want in my paint is the water that I put in my paint, not that my palette put in my paint. So I want to have something that hydrates my paint but doesn't put water in it. I want to be totally in control of that. So something like this. See, I just went to Reapercon. I got these really cool paint pokers. Bait and tackle box. So basically, when I thin my paints, I just dip my brush in, like the tip of it, just so I can get a little bit. I always only thin the pocket of paint that I want to paint with. I don't thin the whole thing, because if you thin the whole thing and then it's too thin, you're adding more paint. So I just use the part that I have right there. When I'm selecting, oh cool. When I'm selecting my colors, I usually put on my highlight, shadow, and base coat color. I always say I never use white or black, but I use black every single day. But I do prefer using like a dark shade of blue for my shadows. And on something like this, a lot of times, depending on what color it is, I'll use the ice yellow instead of a white, or silver gray from Vallejo. Those are really two of the only Vallejo colors I use, and the reason for that is I find that Vallejo doesn't stick very well, and so I end up rubbing off a lot of paint. And painting for a living, if I'm rubbing paint off constantly, like just easily, I'm losing money. So I just get really frustrated with that. But these, since they're my highlight colors, it doesn't really matter. The trick for painting on top of your airbrushing. Now I always start with a black base coat and build my colors up. If they need to be really bright, I'll put some white shades on and then paint the color back over it. So it's almost like an underbase, like if you're on a t-shirt where you have different colors. They put white down first and then put the colors over them. Same principle for this. If I don't need to have super bright, like on this, I didn't bother doing a white and then the purple because I needed sort of a dark purple. I wanted it sort of dark and